Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And once again, when it comes to news from the development of EVE Online, we don't have a lot of information. In fact, nothing new has really been reported. There is one item that I think is good news for a lot of people, or is considered good news for a lot of people. It's like I saw a thread on the subreddit about an interview with with another dev, I think it was Cispiritati, who confirmed that at the moment there is no active development and no real plans to bring NFTs into EVE Online. A very controversial topic. I also made a video about it, sharing my view on all of this for last week. We will of course have to keep an eye on everything. While it's also kind of crazy, in my book it's also really fascinating and interesting to see. I think for us EVE Online players there is a lot of entertainment to be had there as well. So yeah, unfortunately, except for that, we don't have any real news. Kind of quiet, and it's the last week for January is coming. So I do wonder when we'll get some news on how compression is going to work when it comes to like the Orca, Urcal, and all of that good stuff. Let's take a quick look at the new Eden store and see if there's anything happening over here. I think we're still basically being dominated by the Doctor Who event. So we've got those new skins that are at the forefront. We're not really noticing any sales or anything like that, and in these services, yeah, nothing special to report here. Alright, that means that we get to move on to the market, and we're gonna start with plex and stuff at a 150. So there we go. You may have seen it on the ticker as well. While sellers for plex, well, someone just came in with a pretty aggressive, I call it aggressive, maybe someone made a mistake, that's possible as well. 2.8 million, but most are selling just below 2.9 million or up to 2.9 million. So that is definitely like a little bit of a barrier that risks being broken, is that those sellers are now willing to go below the 2.9 million mark. Buyers in Jita are just below 2.8 million. Same story for the Tranquility Trading Tower. And if you then go for sellers, yeah, a little bit more even here. Going a little bit further below that 2.9 million. It's still tiny volumes, but it does show that the market is hesitating at the moment to drive prices higher. In fact, some sellers are willing to go a little bit lower. Average price on the chart is actually going up to just above 2.75 million. So another week, honestly, no news, more hesitation. I do expect that to be the trend for this week yet again. The multiple pilot train certificate going down substantially, a couple of average prices below 1.4 billion. We are still at the 1.5 billion for most sellers, couple coming in towards 1.45 billion, and buyers are at 1.3. So on some days, apparently you are grabbing multiple pilot train certificates for 1.3 billion. Considering these buy orders and those average prices, it's just a tiny niche market, so you should be careful though. But a bit of margin apparently has opened up here, and a little bit of downwards pressure on the average prices at least is clearly seen here. If you can buy for 1.3 and then you can get through some of these and sell for 1.5, that is definitely a trade that's doable. But again, on the daily volumes, it's not gonna be easy. Then we've got our skill extractors that show that same hesitation, that 20-day moving average. The orange line is really flat. I think the market doesn't really know where to go. We're talking about 325 million for the sellers, mostly in the Tranquility trading tower, no, in a trade hub, and then in the Kaldari Navy assembly plant. Kind of weird. In Jita we go up to almost 330 million, so I think that's still very close to one another, and buyers are coming in at 319. That is a pretty narrow margin between sellers and buyers, and so we get a very flat chart with not a lot of room for these averages to move up or down. I think again that we'll have to wait for CCP to actually announce some stuff before we'll see some real movement here. The impact on the skill injectors, here are the large skill injectors, still seeing a little bit of downwards pressure. Definitely some daily averages that go down to like a 630 million for the large skill injector. Let's see where those prices are at. 652 for the sellers, 16 for those buyers. That's a little bit more margin that's opening up, right? 40, almost 40 million ISK. That's something to work with, I would say. at this point. And then in Jita itself, let's see where those sellers go up to 660. So again, yeah, 650 to 652 to 660. That's a little bit of margin here. So a little bit of selling pressure in the Tranquility Trading Tower is dominating this market, and we're seeing the result of that, just showing a little bit of pressure on the large-scale injector market. To me, same story here. You do get a little bit of a high point in November, December when CCP announced, hey, we're bringing, we're really changing mining ships and we're bringing compression to the Orca and Orcal. Quite a bit of need to, switch some pilots out there. But now that we again still don't know when or how things are going to work, I think we have that pullback, and I will start to move sideways probably at these average prices. Definitely a little bit of range though. The small scale injectors are, pretty much not able to do their own thing on this one, also going down to a little bit of a lower average for its price, and we're talking 133 million for the sellers and a 123 million for the buyers. It's pretty much a 10 million margin, almost 10%, almost workable. I do think that this feels pretty normal. And then Jita again, a million extra. There is not that much, but still on a 10 million margin, it's another 10%. So that's decently significant. Yeah, the pressure is basically on as the market gets into that wait and see pattern of what is CCP actually planning to do. Next, we have the daily alpha injectors that are also in a holding pattern, you would say, just above 40 million, easily maintaining really close daily averages of around 41 million ISK. Sellers are coming in at that 41 million mark, 37 million for the buyers. So I think here it's that story that I have been telling that I think is kind of right. Alpha players that make themselves, or that set that goal for themselves to earn that 40-ish million daily alpha injector on the daily, are a very big chunk of what's happening in this market, and so average prices are completely dominated by the sellers. But CCP's intervention here in November, when we went above 50 million, really helped stabilize the market, brought it back to that 40 million average, very doable goal. And so I think everyone is actually pretty happy with the state of these daily alpha injectors, except maybe speculators that are hoping to grab some actual trade money out of this. I think it's really dominated by users rather than traders. Then we finally have the hypercore that is also going back down a little bit. So we had a counter to almost everything in this category, an upwards movement to well above 300,000 ISK here. We're starting to give back a little bit of those gains. 304,000 for the sellers, 290,000 for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin on this downwards pressure again. So I think this, if you then take the full 2-3 month chart, if you take that in, then again we're pretty stable, and the market just doesn't really know which way to go with the current information, which is not a lot. Let's move on to the mineral market, coming in at 825. There we go. As always, we start with titanium. You may have seen it on the ticker here. A little bit more hesitation, a bit of pressure. I think that's still very normal, considering that we're still selling well above 4.5 ISK. Sellers in Jita are coming in at 470, going up towards 480 decently quickly, couple 100 million units, and we're there. Buyers at 467. It's really that demand, couple of decently large orders that are keeping things in line for titanium. So we do have to be careful. If we run this down to really low numbers, we can go to a 450 and below decently quickly, so you do have to be somewhat careful. But at the moment, demand is strong enough to maintain that price well above 4.5, so supply is coming in quite nicely as well, but it's still a pretty damn good price for titanium, considering this 1 year chart. And of course, the knowledge that here in April, this was the industry changes that really forced things down, and from the patch day itself, I think it was late April, we went down substantially because the amount of titanium needed in the economy in general went down on the industry changes. Next up, we've got pyrite. Can that one stop the slide? It cannot, continuing to go down. I kind of warned for this when we had this chart start to really break that 15 ISK mark. That was not good news. It meant that, in my opinion, the market was starting to look for a new average average, a new range, and it's even going through 14 here. Sellers coming in at 13.40 and buyers coming in at 12.40. Volumes compared to titanium, 270 here, 70 million here, another 77 million here in those two orders. It's still a huge amount of pyrite that is currently crashing the market. In JITA, 1 year low point, average is getting close to 12.5. So this is clearly not your focus if you're mining in high sec. Titanium is doing all right. Let's see what Mixalon is doing. Doing all right as well. I think here we'll have a much narrower margin with sellers and buyers willing to pay above, just below 70, above 65. 68 is for the sellers, 65 is for the buyers, exactly. So this is the same story. Right away, you do see also that the volumes feel a lot more reasonable. Most sell orders, just a couple million units or below that. Buyers, not that big either, but I think this 50 million here at 63.40 is keeping things in line here quite nicely as well. So it's the same story. If you are mining in high sec, you want to focus on TRIT and on Mixalon. Then we get our low sec minerals. Here is the Isogen chart that is starting to move its way back up after we almost went to 100 ISK on a lot of supply again, of course. 113 for the sellers and 110 for the buyers, and this is far more reasonable. A couple of sell orders above 10 million and then here a 25 million that we still have to chew through, but we can see, in my opinion, a much better path towards that 125 again, where we have another 250 million units that are waiting to just be nibbled at again. I think this is really interesting. In all likeliness, this started at a 250 and I actually managed to get a couple of sales when the chart was at a high point, maybe here, and then you know, we do of course have the active supply playing a role as well, but I still hold that these orders are probably reserves. Older stocks that are finding their way to the market, but eventually we can chew through that and then we're gonna start to nibble here again. So I do think this pattern where we'll go up to 125, hit that big sell order, go back down on new supply on people you know, that want to get that price of, let's say, a 120 and are happy with that for Isogen, and again we're still in this dynamic. I don't see that changing at this point, but it's interesting to see that again it is one big older sell order that is putting that ceiling here. We had the exact same thing here when we had this entire period here of very stable prices, and so this could go on for like another 2 months unless that seller decides to pull that big sell order. Of course, you never know, something like that might happen as well, but for now this is the pattern. Isogen trying to get above that 125, but we get a pretty big sell order that's going to keep us from doing that in any substantial way. Then we've got the Noxium chart that is going back up towards the 1500 ISK. So here also in line with my personal expectation. 1,430 plus for the sellers, 1,300 plus for those buyers. We do have one big order here of 15 million units, but you can, I think, right away on the volume see the difference, right? You get sell orders coming in with just a couple thousand units, a couple 100,000 units, and up to a few million is what most sell orders can manage. You don't have 250 million units waiting to block the price at a certain range or something like that. This is the active supply demand mechanic that's working in Noxium, which means that, you know, on occasions when there is a lot of demand and not enough supply, we'll get really high prices like 1500 ISK, and then on occasions where maybe there's a little bit less passion for industry, less need for the mineral, we could have a really nice pullback to 1000 ISK like what we had down here. And this is a completely different chart. I think you can tell from what's happening with Isogen that you know, gets stuck at certain ranges for prolonged periods of time because of those old reserves. But eventually we will chew through those, and then we will start to see, you know, in my opinion, Noxium and Isogen starting to, you know, work together, be far more correlated, and that could be a very lucrative time as well for miners in low sec. On the other hand, I must also say that, yeah, I think the player base for EVE Online is very savvy, and you would be surprised at how many players are, you know, still ready with lots of Isogen if we finally break through that 125 as well. It is, of course, still, you know, a market ripe for speculation. Then we got the nullsec minerals. Here is Zydrine back below 1000 ISK, but not by too much here. 900 and what was it? 970 for the sellers, 950 for the buyers. So clearly a market dominated by the importers, by the sellers of this Zydrine. A little bit of pressure, a little bit of competition coming in, but again, looking at these volumes, far more in line with what Noxium is able to do. Couple million as the big orders, and a few 100,000 is what most people or what most sellers bring to the market in one go. You know, there's not that much need for Zydrine out there either, but this really gives them the strength to dictate the price you know, not that much Zydrine can probably make a big difference in the price range as well. So to have a chart like this without seeing like a sell order that's like tens of millions of units or anything like that, right? You don't see that here, is really a testament to how well organized, how stable and how strong nullsec is in the game, because this is basically their mineral, and they're really good at getting that the price they want, but also at having that steady supply and at a very steady price range. Actually pretty impressive. Then we've got Megasite that is starting to lose a little bit as well, going back below 700 ISK, 700 for the sellers, 660 for the buyers, opening up a little bit of a margin, you could say, on that one. Again, couple million, a million plus for some orders, few 100,000 is what most sell orders do. So not that much buying could drive up in price pretty quickly. Not that much supply can actually mean a big difference in the price on the downwards pressure as well. And so I think here what was happening, just like with Zydrine, we do have a bit of a response to the mining changes. This one was preemptive. The market said Zydrine, right, nullsec, Rorquals, we're probably gonna lose some potential there, at least in the short term. So they pushed the price up to 1000 ISK. Megasite was only when the patch actually hit, it jumped from 600 to above 700 ISK. But this is, of course, you know, looking at the charts and historically speaking, a pretty damn good price. And so you do have a little bit more incentive for sellers to come in on the market. That's putting some pressure until we will again find that consensus price for nullsec, and then in all likeliness we'll just stay right there. Those buyers have to go up right up to those sell prices to have any hope of picking up Zydrine. And then finally we've got a Morphite that is now landing on the 50k. Interesting to see that that pressure is still going on at the moment. 52,000 for the sellers, 49,000 for the buyers. Buyers are below 50k, I think, for the first time in a very long time for Morphite. And you can see the volumes as well are starting to pick up. I still think it's my theory with the mining changes. There was a doubling of the available resources in space. And what are you going to prioritize? What is the mineral that is going to be snagged up for those full 200%? It is of course going to be Morphite, because it's just so outrageously expensive compared to all the other minerals. And that means that we have a far more sustained effort to grab all the Morphite that you can, which eventually spills over into more supply and thus lower prices. And it's interesting that we keep stepping down in these prices, despite the fact that we're now, I think, almost a couple months in on the mining changes themselves. So it does have, you know, take a little bit of time for the market to fully absorb it. Really cool to see. Then we have our PI market coming in next at 1845. There we go. Yeah, here again, I don't expect too much, as long as we are, you know, in a period without real information from CCP. I think that for PI, not much will be moving. The story here, for people that might not know just yet, we had a very strong summer, especially for the advanced PI materials and for some of the fuel PI materials as well. But then CCP announced that they were going to change potentially or rebalance the industry for the larger ships, which was all of that extra demand for advanced PI materials came from there. That's why you could sell broadcast nodes at 2 million ISK at some points in late summer and in the fall. And the place they were looking at were not the new items they'd introduced, but PI, and that of course crashed the market quite massively. On top of that, CCP then announced that they would perhaps add PI materials to moon mining, which again, you know, had, I think, a lot lot of people panic and dump whatever they could, not willing to buy any of these advanced PI materials anymore because they would just tank in price yet again. CCP said we're not going to do the final part, but if any rebalancing does happen, I think everyone is still basically expecting it to be in the PI materials market or not, but then, you know, it's kind of risky to expect that increased demand to be needed, because if I'm not mistaken, a little bit of a rebalancing has already happened, and so we're stuck at these low prices because, well, we don't know what CCP is planning to do, and I don't think anyone really at the moment wants to be holding the bag on a lot of advanced PI materials, which, you know, maybe is a mistake, right? Maybe at some point it will become very, very profitable, but for anything short to medium term, it's just too much of an unknown for most people, and this is why we get this massive drop back, and then here this period of hesitation that we're in right now. Broadcast nodes are selling for 1.2 million, and buyers are at 1 million, so very close to one another, but at super low prices. Construction blocks are going back down as well. They touched on 8,000 disc, which I would still say is like 20% below their historical averages. So PI in general, passive stuff is definitely not too appreciated at the moment, and is going back down towards 7k, 7.5 for the sellers, 7.1 for the buyers. So here again, there's just less demand, less expectation that PI is really going to see an increase in valorization, which is in line with what CCP actually has announced. Now, we sometimes have exceptions, of course. Here is consumer electronics shooting up to 8,000 disc, which, you know, historically again is still a pretty damn bad price, but on this chart it's pretty nice. So sellers have come in at 7.3. We're being crushed very quickly. So apparently we went up to 8k. Buyers are still at 6,100 discs, so expect this to basically crater down very quickly. Then we've got PI material tied to fuels that's still doing really well. In fact, I'm still slowly selling in Amar as well, because I've been producing coolants during this entire period here and not selling, hoping for better prices. Here they are. Coolants selling for 12k, 12,500 disc. Buyers coming in at almost 11,000 disc. Even historically speaking, this is a great price for coolants, and so I've been unloading more and more of that stuff as well in Amar for very good prices. For some reason, there is very strong demand here in the coolants market. It's pretty easy to produce. Gas planets are very ubiquitous, and it doesn't take too much to make a refined PI material. So it's nice to see this one make a very good comeback. Cryoprotectant solutions still trying to fully recover, and it'll take some time from the implant that was the BPC that could drop from the event that really increased demand, and so we're still selling for 120,000, buyers at 112. If again you want in on that speculation of maybe CCP comes out with an implant, and now we know that there's another aspect to this, CCP might come out with an event where BPCs for implants drop, then try and buy low, let's say below 100,000. This for cryoprotectant solutions is something to hopefully look forward to. Enriched uranium is still doing all right as well, although historically speaking, again, I think 12.5 was actually a normal price for enriched uranium. Almost 10,000 for the sellers, 9,150 for the buyers. So definitely reasonable. It is tied to fuels after all. Integrity response drones seeing a little bit of a move up here in price, a little bit unexpected in my book, but we're above 1.6 million for the sellers. Buyers, though, not really willing to follow suit. They're still below 1.5 million. Mechanical parts are doing decently well as well, especially on the 1 year chart. 8,000 for the sellers, 7.9 almost for the buyers. So there is definitely stronger demand for refined PI materials tied to fuel blocks. And so these are having a pretty good period at the moment, even though it's really only coolants in my book that's back at historically normal level. Mechanical part used to be worth pretty much the same as coolants because it's just as easy to produce. Barren planets or gas planets is all you need, and I'm a bit surprised to see this gap maintain or stay this strong. Nanites then, that's not good, going back down, 5.2 for the sellers, 4,600 for the buyers. This is also a refined PI materials. What a big difference compared to coolants, for instance, less than half the price. So this one is really not doing well, but we're keeping it in there. It was a request. Then we've got the nano factories, right, same story, really strong with a spike up to above 1 million ISK in September. Then we had all of the announcements, so things crashed down to less than 700,000 ISK. We just got a 1 year low point, touched 600,000 on a couple of days, so recovering from that. But are we gonna break above 800, 900,000? That's just not going to happen at this point. 760 for the sellers, 720 for the buyers. Organic mortar applicators, here again, let's get that view. So September, nice, up to 850, and then here is the decline. 1 year low points at the 650 range, and then at the moment 700,000 for the seller, 650 for the buyers. The market is really not willing to invest in advanced PI at this point. Recursive computing module still has that annoying data point, but yeah, you can see the exact same story. Here's a strong September, October, then the decline and the hesitation at the tail end. For robotics, all right, nice, 70k, okay. Now let's keep in mind, historical price reference for robotics from me personally is around 100,000 ISK, so this is still not a great price, but 73,000 for the sellers, 65,000 for the buyers is definitely the best price we've had in a year for robotics. Which is tied to fuel, by the way. Self-harmonizing power cores are going back down as well. It's that same hesitation pattern, really. 1.25 million to 1.15 million, pretty much. I quickly wanted to notice as well for robotics, if I'm not mistaken, there is a planet type. I've actually done it at some point. It's like the blue one. Is it? Like bluish lava. I'm not exactly sure which one it is. Magma, or no, it's something else, I think. Let me know in the comments what the planet type is, but there is one where you can basically extract all 4 basic resources to make both the intermediate, the refined ones, and where you can make consumer electronics and mechanical parts. Oh, this might actually explain why consumer electronics is going up. There we go. So there is, you can make this on a single planet as well. It's just, you do need that third tier, which cuts down on the potential for the other 2 tiers, but it is possible to have a setup on a single planet that produces robotics. So that's actually pretty damn cool. Then we have the sterile conduits next. Yeah, 1 year low point back below 800,000, 840 for the sellers, but just below 800,000 for the buyers, and that should really worry anyone that's looking at maybe seeing this as a buy opportunity or something like that. This price and this decline in price means that no one is grabbing anything from the sellers. It's all just the buyers. It's all dumping to the buyers. That's happening at the moment in order to create this kind of an average price. Yukomi superconductors next, pretty flat at 75k, which is again not that great, but coming in line with the robotics. So 78, almost 80,000 for the sellers, 70,000 for the buyers. A little bit less supply, a little bit more demand is keeping prices okay-ish on the 1 year chart. Historically, it's still pretty bad, of course. And then finally, the wetware mainframes, another bounce from a really bad low point. 1.5 million almost for the sellers, 1.4 million almost for those buyers. So PI not doing too well, except tied to fuels. All of a sudden, we are seeing a nice resurgence in value there. Next up, advanced wound materials, 28.35. There we go. Let's get started as always with carbides. Here is crystalline carbonate, and kind of confirming the pullback that we saw last week. We're back below 150. 144 for the sellers, 141 for the buyers, and basically the whole bubble year around the industry changes in April, with the volatility for a couple of months after that, and then the slowly declining, and then the margin that was actually held up through fall and most of the winter is finally over, and we're back where we started. A complete null operation for the entire year, basically. Next, we've got the Caldari one. Titanium carbide, yeah, actually a 1-year low point at the moment, landing on a 150 as well. 152 for the sellers, 147 for the buyers. It's gonna start to be interesting to see if maybe you should buy, but the real question is, of course, where is all of this stability supply coming from that is keeping prices in check like that? Is it because at the moment there's not enough destruction and so there's no need for a lot of Tech 2 production, or is it something else at play? Is Nelsec so quiet that they are easily able to ramp up their supplies? Moon mining has gone up substantially in volumes, if I'm not mistaken, from the monthly economic report, so there's might just be massive supplies out there that won't just be destroyed overnight either. Then we might be in for cheap prices in the longer term. Then we've got Ferrite carbide here, also still a little bit of a premium, right? But you can see that we're just slowly losing that premium. Sometimes we are going below 150, 156 for the sellers, 148 for the buyers. We need to see the 125, 150 range to really be back where we started. But you know, it's the same pattern, obviously. So here's all the speculation and the volatility, which included wartime in Nelsec, and then we get a nice plateau well above 150, where eventually we buckle down and we go back towards the average range of a year ago. Tungsten carbide is right there as well. Look at that April volatility. It all goes down. We get the premium. Lost a little bit of ground early on, so you saw that Amar kind of said, yeah, I'm not sure if we're gonna keep this premium across the board, and now everyone has pretty much lost it. Back on the 125 to 150 range, 137 to 125 for the buyer. So the carbides have basically, you know, Minmatar is maybe a little bit expensive still from that perspective, but on the 1 year chart, it's basically the same for all of them. We're back where we started from. I would say there is clearly strong supply, very steady supply at the moment, and maybe not enough destruction and demand on the other side as well. Then we have the metamaterials that have actually been super stable. So here is photonic metamaterial, except for a couple of spikes that actually take a while to fully absorb. You can see here starts below 12.5k. We're right back there again, actually maybe overshooting a little bit on supply from this spike. 11,280 for the sellers, 10,700 for the buyers. Might be on the cheap side at the moment if you can grab some really cheap ones, but honestly 12.5 for the high average for the entire year, and I think we'll easily bounce back towards that. Then we've got the nonlinear metamaterials for Caldari, right? Its range is a little bit different. Around the 20,000 ISK range, which is then the low end of its range, and at the moment we're also just below that, 19,000 for the sellers, 17,600 for the buyers. This is another it's cheap moment, or relatively cheap moment, so that's interesting. We are perhaps starting to see a bit of pressure show up in the metamaterials as well, after all of these carbides are also showing increased supplies and the slower prices. Maybe this is a side result of that as well. Then we've got the plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar, clearly below average at the moment as well, but stabilizing quickly. 17,000 for the sellers, 16,300 for the buyers. And then for terahertz metamaterials, flat at 15k. Pretty much where you would expect it, 15.5 to almost 15,000 for the buyer. So the metamaterials seeing a little bit of pressure there as well, but this one here, where is it? Oh no, it was the Galente one. Did just recover from a big spike. Maybe that's part of the problem. An unusual spike, I would say, in the metamaterials that have actually been super stable over the last year. So we'll see if it continues. I do think, looking at the general trend here, that there is a chance that we're just seeing more and steadier supply across the board for the Tech 2 materials, and that could mean lower prices for both the carbides and the metamaterials if this has even more momentum. Then we still have some other advanced moon mats to take a look at. Fermionic condensates kind of recovering to the 1 year average here as well, but with a bad year you could say, and a 1 year low point of 50,000 ISK, but back at 67 for the sellers and 53 for the buyers, showing demand really isn't there yet, so a little bit of supply can crashes right back down. It's very dangerous, I would say here. Dangerous times. Ferrogel back below 30k, so back on the low end. 28,000 for the buyers. Then we've got fuller rides, still really low as well, 700 disc as the average price, not great. Hypersynaptic fibers doing a little bit better, actually going above 10,000 ISK for the week, 10.6 for the sellers, 9.4 for the buyers. But again, my expectation will be right back down towards the 9,000 ISK pretty quickly. Nano transistors, that's what I'm kind of expecting, right? We went above 4,500 ISK. People see that as an opportunity to sell anything at a slightly better price. There's the supply, and we're back down towards that 1 year high low point of 4,000 ISK, 412. 4,000. So we're crushing all of that supply is crushing everything right back down towards those buyers. Phenolic composites had a better period after the changes to industry, but eventually we're back around that 1500 price range. So that's basically a full recovery as well. 1550 to 1400 ISK, big margin, not that much demand. Our new ones, pressurized oxidizers, had a little bit of a bump here, so our first signs that sometimes these will move as well. Currently though, 14k for the sellers, 13k for the buyers, pretty normal and average, I would say. Reinforced carbon fibers, very, very stable, a little bit of pressure going below the 3 million mark. Oh, what's that? No, that's the volumes going below the 12.5. Yep, exactly. 11.5 for the sellers, 10,800 for the buyers. It'll just take a little bit more time, I think, for the chart to really start to show some patterns, but for now these do feel pretty stable. And then we've got the ceramic fibers finally, that also had a very strong period around the industry changes, but basically normalized and touches 300 on the downside. Again, at the moment we're a little bit higher, 350 to 340 for ceramic fibers. So I would say plenty of supply, and for a lot of it perhaps even more supply than what the market can bear, and so pressure on the prices. Take two ships next. Let's take a look at those. 3630. There we go. Oh, and I do want to show you a couple of things. Trying to buy a Nemesis at 19.5. Spotted that could be interesting. And then trying to sell a Manticore, bought for 27 million, including taxes. Trying to sell for 30 million, including taxes. I'd be happy with that. Let's see what's happening though. First of all, we've got the Basilisk, which I think last week was still pretty damn low. And 2 weeks ago we touched that 180, so that was your buy opportunity. We're bouncing back to the 200 million ISK, 200 for the sellers, 184 for the buyers. So I think there are some more aggressive buyers that have come in on this as well. But the bad news is that the general trend for me is still down on spikes. So I would say, in all likeliness, we get another cycle in us where we'll just stop our increased price, will start to go back down. Hopefully eventually we can stop with this narrowing and more stability, less volatility, which is what we need for trading. But yeah, this is another one. Buy as cheaply as possible, buy 1 year low points, that makes sense, but consider those longer term investments because we're not seeing the spiky behavior we need just yet. Then we've got the Cerberus, right? Still very, very much stable, not really able to break out, let's say, above a 250 or something like that. Even the low points are now starting to converge on that 230 million mark. 224 for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. Yeah, I'd say nope, not the right time. You definitely want the chart to touch 200 to buy below 200 million, I think, before you jump in. Then we've got the Guardian that did have a couple of very nice pronounced buy opportunities when the chart went below 180 million ISK. Then we moved up to 210. So this is one of those signs that perhaps volatility is starting to come back, because that's definitely tradable. At the moment we are going back down, a 193 for the sellers and 176 for the buyers. So you can, on this pressure now, I think, try to snag a Guardian below 180 million, which, you know, does make sense, but I will give that warning. You know, this is one sign that perhaps a bit of volatility is coming back. Overall, I'm still not sure that that's the case. Then we've got the Hound that, you know, had this, is in my opinion, really the first one that gave us hope, that made us start looking for those signs that volatility is back, because that one actually made a 1-year high point, went above 30 million a couple of months after going to a 1-year low point for 22.5, and that was clearly a trend break from that decreasing highs and then just constantly landing on these low points, decreasing volatility. That trend was broken for the first time. At the moment we're still in expensive territory, I would say 27 for the sellers, 24 for the buyers, so we need to see that pressure mount again in order to get a buy opportunity. But this was an obvious and doable trade that you could have jumped in on pretty without having any real risk. At some point that was bound to happen, although we never knew when that spike was going to happen. But yeah, buying here made a lot of sense, and that's what we want to see in Tech 2. Then we get the Iquitursa, that's going back below 650, 656 for the seller, 632 for the buyers. It's mostly here to keep an eye on Triglavian stuff. I would say we are, doing decently well, quickly absorbing a price spike for the Iquitursa. Then the Ishtar was really low a couple of weeks ago as well, I think here. So when the chart touches 190, you can buy very cheaply, but we're trying here. We get data points at 210. Let's see where the sellers are at. 210, buyers coming in at 195. So you're still buying Ishtar below 200 million, but it's too late for the real bargains. You could have bought well below 190, and unfortunately, right, we're not seeing a breakout yet. If we would reach like a 230, maybe even a 240, that would be another sign that, yeah, volatility is coming back. Unfortunately, here for the Ishtar, get maybe a tiny trade on the very best buy order, but not much more than that. So I would hold on. If you bought some really cheap Ishtars, I would still hold on to them. Then we get to Manticore, which I have been following a little bit more closely because I did buy one of them at 27 million, which was a little bit early, but it is including taxes, so it was probably still down here somewhere on the chart, and I think I bought it quite a while ago. And then we had our first breakout again. Look at the volumes, right? People want Manticores, maybe something happened in Nullsec, and we broke out well above 30 million. So I have been trying to sell. I'm not sure if I'll succeed. I'm maybe stuck over here somewhere, but we're still selling close to 31 million ISK. Buyers have been forced up to 29 million. So again, if you bought at the low points here, you do have a first trade in a long time that can be made for the Manticore. Will it, is this a sign for more things to come? Difficult to say, because the other side is possible as well. If we disregard, let's say January here, you had quite a few sell opportunities that would have been, below a 190. But what can happen as well is that we go to even lower price point. Sellers at 183, buyers at 173. If you want in on the cheapest possible munitions for the year, pretty much, then right now is probably your opportunity to do so. The one good news is that the daily average here did manage to climb up to 240 million. So that's a decent spread. It's definitely a break from that downwards highs that we were seeing here. But yeah, a new low is formed just after that. So hopefully it's the start of something. I'm still not sure. Nemesis next, also continuing to go even lower. So are the buyers finally below 20 million? Yes, sellers as well. So you can easily grab a Nemesis just above 19 million because sellers are coming in at 19,250, buyers are at 19,200. If you could get rid of that one, you're buying close to 18 million. So keep a close eye on the Nemesis. I think a buy opportunity may just be forming here with real 1-year low points. Can you imagine an 18,250? That's all the way down here on the chart. That would of course be very, very nice. And it is another break from the low points that are continuing to go down and down and down. If then we can get a surge up all of a sudden, perhaps volatility is back on the menu. It's still, again, I would say I'd be happy to buy really low now, which is what I'm trying to do. Yeah, 19.5. So I probably snag those then, considering what's happening here. I'm not exactly sure unless this is my buy order that still hasn't been filled. We will see. But yeah, at the moment, Nemesis, right, I'm looking at able to buy below 20 million, including taxes, is definitely not a bad purchase on this chart. And it looks like potentially we could get even cheaper Nemesis on the menu. So let's see if it works out. On Euros next, a bit of a jump, unfortunately not a real breakout. So I'd say they're just not great at the moment. 182 for the sellers, but still a 161 for the buyers, which is really cheap. But you could have bought close to 150 not that long ago. So yeah, keeping an eye on the cheapest places on the 1 year low points is pretty important. Then we've got the Panther for the general feeling. I think this does make sense. This is why I added a couple of battleships in here. We've seen all the pressure in advanced movements, pretty much all of the carbides losing the margin that they had enjoyed for quite a few months after the volatility. And so here we're seeing a little bit of pressure on the price going down to 1.1 billion, just above that for the sellers and still above that for the buyers as well. I think this does show that they're able to, at the moment, say I'm willing to sell here, because if I want to make a Panther right now, I'm probably looking at least somewhat of a margin. Then we've got the Purifier. Yeah, unfortunately, right, we would need to see a breakout, which we are not. 24.4 for the sellers, 22.5 for the buyers. I'd wait for the chart to go back down and then look for the buy opportunity. Then we get the Scimitar, definitely not the cheapest at the moment either. 200 million for the sellers, 181 for the buyers. But again, unless we start to see like a breakout here, that's not a sign that a lot of volatility is in the market. And then we get the Widow, same story, did go to a 1.5 billion, perhaps on a little bit of demand or something like that, but normalized very quickly, and 1.15 billion for the sellers, a billion for the buyers. I think again, these sellers can at the moment say I'm willing to sell a Widow at 1.15, because if you're looking in the industry at the production costs, we're actually pretty down at the moment. And then finally, we've got the Zealot. That's at the 190. Again, not really a 1 year low point. Was also one that gave us a little bit of hope on volatility coming back on a spike up to 230. So that's the dream, right? You get a 1 year low point. You can probably buy below 170 at the lowest end right here. And then maybe 10 days later, you're selling above 230 million. There's your trades. That's volatility. That's what we want to see. It gives a little bit of hope, but at the moment, I would say I'm still not sure if it's structurally something that's back on the Tech 2 sheep market. 193 to 175, those buyers are still pretty damn low, well below 180. So if you absolutely want a Zealot investment, it's still reasonable to do so. I do think on the real low points, you buy even cheaper. Next up, the Tech 3 ships. That's coming in at 46.50. There we go. Let's start with the destroyers as always. So here we had expensive destroyers, but we have the Confessor making its way back above 50 million on expectation. This was in line with what we thought should happen, as the Hecate had a crazy spike and the Jackdaw was well above 50 as well. This should mean not that much supply for the Confessor, and it's exactly that. You can see a couple being brought in, 6 sell orders in the last 24 hours, but we're basically starting to run out as industrialists and traders focus on the better selling ships, which is the Hecate and the Jackdaw. And so we're back at 53 to 55 million for the sellers of the Confessor, 47 million for the buyers, and really not a lot of supply, bringing this one I think in line with the Hecate and the Jackdaw. And so what happened was the Hecate went up to 70-80 million ISK. This should really drive attention, demand, production. Let's take advantage of this price, right? All of these ships that trade down here and all of these volumes actually go for a 60+ million. That's a lot of ISK to whoever manages the sale. It does eventually crash the price down, but we're still at 56 million for the sellers, 51 million for the buyers. And this is what you would expect. Look at all of this. This is everything that's coming in the last 48 hours in this case, but this is where the supply is, and this is why the Confessor predictably, finally, it's been a long time since I've been able to say that in the tactical destroyer market, but predictably went up from that low point down here, and now you've got the trade that you could expect on all of that volatility in the Hecate and the Jackdaw. You could have bought close to 40 million. At the moment, you're selling at 53 million in all likeliness, pretty damn easily. So that's the trade. That's why I love the tactical destroyer market, but I will give that warning. It's a lot slower at the moment than what we've been used to before. Then we've got the Jackdaw that is still well above 55 million as well. Basically, the Hecate had such a big spike, I think, that this one will not be too high on supply, but starting to come in. Yeah, exactly 56, going down to 55.5 million for the sellers, 50 million for the buyers. I think this will now help stabilize, but we have to accept that for the Confessor, the Hecate and the Jackdaw, a 50 plus million price range does seem to be pretty damn normal, and maybe even a 55-ish million could end up being the place where they'll meet up pretty much. And then my expectation would be for this vehicle to finally go up as well, but as I've said, it's been doing really weird stuff, so let's see what's happening. It's actually going down. That's kind of crazy. Despite the huge volume spike on a day, we're still at 47 million for the sellers of this vehicle. No buyers whatsoever. 43 million for the buyers. Very, very cheap, of course, compared to all of these others. New supply, yeah, a couple of sell orders, maybe 10 ships in the last 24 hours as well, that are still putting pressure on the price, which is kind of crazy. I would say logic, right? And historically, I would say if you can buy a vehicle or a couple of vehicles below 45 million, you've got something in hand that should go up at some point, especially if, and it's looking like that, the Confessor, Hecate and the Jackdaw are going to start to settle down for average price around 55 million. That should mean more potential for this vehicle, but it's just been so unresponsive to everything that's been happening in those other markets that I'm going to put a little bit of doubt on that in my own mind. I would say there's a slight gambling aspect to it, which before I was way more confident that something like that would happen, but we also needed to wait such a long time for the trade down here from that one year low point below 40 million to actually materialize. I would have expected all of that to start to shoot up in the September-October period, because look at what was happening here. September, October, 55 million for a Jackdaw, but that just did not happen. So I would say, to me, it makes sense to try and grab a couple of cheap vehicles at the moment, but yeah, it's not a sure thing at this point. Then we've got our cruisers. Here is the Legion going for 200 million. I would say back on the high end of the trade range. 205 for the sellers, 188 for the buyers. They're pushed up a little bit. Here I mentioned it, buy below 180, sell at around 200. Seems to be a pattern that's holding for the Legion for now. Then we've got the Loki, a little bit more stable. It is a pretty damn popular Tech 3 ship as well. 200 million does seem to be an easy price for it to ask for. 204, but it's a 193 for the buyer. So here you know, if you want to jump in on some of these trades, wait for the chart to break 190. Buy as low as possible. It is still possible, but there's more predictability here and more stability. The Proteus making its way up towards 200 as well. 196 million for the sellers, 183 for the buyers. For the Proteus, I would say you can easily buy well below 180, maybe even below 160 on your best occasion. So that's what I would wait to jump in. Grab a cheap hull and then wait for the better prices. You can see that it is starting to have that more predictable wavy pattern with a very clear range to buy as well, and then some pretty pronounced sell opportunities. But yeah, and I think there's still like less room to manipulate it at this point, as there is just more usage. There's more people in the market to buy them, to use them than before. At least that's my read on that. And then we've got the Tengu that's actually going down a little bit towards that 190. So sellers are now at 193, buyers are at 171. I'd call this a buy opportunity for the Tengu, which you're buying down here. And then you can see that sales at 200 million for the Tengu are absolutely possible. I also asked that from you guys last week. What's the most your favorite Tech 3 cruiser? And the Tengu head and shoulders above the others in how popular it is. So at the moment, yeah, if you can snag a Tengu close to 170, I think that's a nice jumping point in order to be ready for potentially higher prices later down the line. And then for the extra product of the week, I am choosing the Gecko. It's been a while since we checked this one. Oh, and I should mention that's 5330 then. 5330 for the Gecko. So it's one of those unique items. I actually am holding a couple of Geckos as well, and it's unique because there is no constant way in the game to produce more of these. So the BPCs are generally rewards or gifts that CCP organizes around certain events or milestones like anniversaries and things like that, or maybe holidays. And so it's been a while, I think, since we've had a new influx of Geckos. You can see that for a period here, July, August, we managed to buy them for close to 90 million ISK, and now they are selling for a 108. Buyers are still below 100 million, but slowly being pushed up towards that. And on this full 1 year chart, the high point is a 120. We're at 107. We're clearly above average. So I would say this is another one of maybe those warnings that you could give as well. If you're someone that actually wants to use the Gecko as a trade item rather than potentially something to fight inflation, which I think it's very good at as well, because it's limited in its supply until CCP comes in and creates more of them. But then you can like buy cheap gold bars, you could say. That's my perspective on the Gecko. I do think they have value that way because of their limited nature. But at the moment, if you're looking to trade, we're definitely trading above average for the Gecko, and so it is perhaps possible for you to make some money on this one, considering where the chart is at. And you definitely want to do that then before CCP comes in with fresh supply. So it's something to constantly keep in mind as well if you're looking to make ISK on the trades of the Gecko, which is absolutely possible. Focus on grabbing as many as possible right after or during an event where CCP actually gives them out or makes the BPC available as a reward or something like that, and then wait for the best sell opportunity. That does mean that you have to at some point pull the trigger as well, and I would say we're pretty close to that point here for the Gecko, because FanFest is coming. Who knows what CCP will organize around that one. Another round of Geckos might make sense to them. So yeah, that's it for this Eve Talk then, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.